This video is made for entertainment purposes only. My name is Jack Weatherly, and in the winter of 1999, I gave something a ride that I still can't fully explain. I was a long-haul trucker for 23 years. I've driven through every kind of weather, every kind of darkness, and I've seen things on those lonely highways that would make most people pull over and quit. But nothing prepared me for what happened on Interstate 90, just outside of Snoqualmie Pass, Washington, on the night of December 17, 1999. I picked up a hitchhiker in a blizzard. He never said a word. He radiated heat like a furnace. And when he disappeared into the forest, he left something behind on my passenger seat, a carved piece of bone that changed my life forever. This is that story. December in the Cascades is brutal. Anyone who's driven those mountain passes in winter knows what I'm talking about. The snow doesn't just fall, it attacks. It comes at you sideways, blinding and relentless, turning the road into a white tunnel where you can barely see 10 feet ahead. I was hauling a load of electronics from Seattle to Spokane. It was supposed to be a routine run, the kind I'd done 100 times before. But the weather report had been wrong, dead wrong. What they'd called light flurries turned into a full-scale blizzard by the time I hit the pass. By 9 p.m., visibility was near zero. The windshield wipers were working overtime, scraping ice as fast as it formed. The road was a sheet of black ice under fresh powder. I was doing maybe 30 miles an hour, white-knuckling the wheel, watching the reflectors on the roadside like they were the only things tethering me to reality. I should have pulled over. I know that now. But back then, I had a schedule to keep and a stubborn streak a mile wide. I told myself I'd driven worse. I told myself I knew these roads. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a bear. Just a dark shape on the side of the road, hunched against the wind. But as my headlights swept over it, I realized it was standing upright. Tall. Impossibly tall. It was a man, or at least, it looked like a man. He was wearing a heavy, dark hooded coat that hung down past his knees, and he had one arm out, thumb extended in the universal sign for a ride. I'm not the kind of guy who picks up hitchhikers. Not anymore. I did it once in the 80s and the guy tried to rob me. But this was different. This was a blizzard in the middle of the Cascades, miles from the nearest town. If I left him out there, he'd die. Simple as that. I downshifted and eased the rig to a stop about 50 feet past him. I could see him in the side mirror, trudging through the snow toward the passenger door. He moved slowly, deliberately, like the storm didn't bother him at all. I leaned over and popped the door open. "Get in," I shouted over the wind. He climbed up into the cab, and that's when I got my first real look at him. He was massive. I'm talking 7 feet tall, easy, maybe more. His shoulders were so broad he had to angle himself to fit through the door. The hooded coat he wore looked handmade, stitched from some kind of dark leather or hide, with the hood pulled low over his face so I couldn't see his features. Snow clung to the fabric, but it was melting fast. And the heat. God, the heat coming off him was unreal. It was like opening the door to a blast furnace. Within seconds, the cab went from freezing to uncomfortably warm. He didn't say a word. Didn't even look at me. He just pulled the door shut, settled into the seat, which groaned under his weight, and stared straight ahead through the windshield. "You okay?" I asked. No response. "Where you headed?" Still nothing. I waited a beat, then shrugged. "All right, man. I'm going east, toward Spokane. I can drop you at the next town if you want." Silence. I put the rig in gear and pulled back onto the highway. The snow was still coming down hard, and the road was getting worse. But now I had something else to worry about, the 7-foot furnace sitting next to me. For the first 10 minutes, neither of us spoke. I kept my eyes on the road, hands locked on the wheel, trying to focus on keeping us alive. But I couldn't stop glancing over at him. His hands rested on his thighs, huge hands, easily twice the size of mine, covered in what looked like thick gloves or wrappings. His breathing was slow and deep, steady as a drumbeat. And that heat, it just kept radiating off him in waves. I had to crack my window just to keep from sweating. "You sure you're okay?" I tried again. You need a hospital or something? He turned his head slightly, just enough that I could see the edge of his profile under the hood. His face was shadowed, but I caught a glimpse of something. Dark skin, maybe, or fur. I couldn't tell. And then he turned back to the windshield without a word. Fine. If he didn't want to talk, that was his business. But the silence was unnerving. I'm used to quiet on long hauls. Sometimes I go hours without hearing another human voice. But this was different. This wasn't peaceful silence. This was the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every sound. The hum of the engine, the scrape of the wipers, the creak of the seat springs under his weight. And underneath it all, I swear I could hear him breathing. Deep, rhythmic breaths that seemed to fill the cab. I turned on the radio, just to have some noise. Static. I twisted the dial, searching for a station, but all I got was crackling white noise. The storm must have knocked out the signal. I turned it off. We drove in silence for another 20 minutes. The blizzard started to let up a little. Not much, but enough that I could see maybe 30 feet ahead instead of 10. The road curved through a dense stretch of forest, tall pines pressing in on both sides, their branches heavy with snow. That's when he moved. It was sudden, a sharp, deliberate motion. He lifted one hand and pointed toward the tree line on the right side of the road. You want me to stop? I asked. He nodded. Once. Slow and deliberate. I didn't see anything out there, just trees and darkness and snow. But something in the way he moved made it clear this wasn't a request. This was a command. I eased off the gas and brought the rig to a stop on the shoulder. The cab idled, headlights cutting through the falling snow. He reached for the door handle. Wait, I said. You sure? There's nothing out there, man. No town, no buildings. Just forest. He paused, turned his head toward me. And for the first time, I saw his eyes. They weren't human. They were too large, too dark, and they reflected the dashboard lights like an animal's. For a moment, we just stared at each other, and I felt something cold and primal crawl up my spine. This wasn't a man. I didn't know what it was, but it wasn't a man. He held my gaze for a long moment. And then, without a word, he opened the door and stepped out into the storm. The cold air rushed in, shocking after the oppressive heat. I watched as he walked around the front of the truck, his massive silhouette moving through the headlights. He didn't hesitate. He just walked straight into the forest, between the trees, and disappeared into the darkness. I sat there, hands still on the wheel, heart pounding. What the hell had I just picked up? I was about to pull back onto the road when I noticed it. On the passenger seat, right where he'd been sitting, there was something small and pale. I leaned over, squinting in the dim light of the cab. It was a piece of bone. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was about the size of my palm, smooth and off-white, shaped like a flattened oval. But it wasn't just a chunk of bone. It had been carved. Intricate patterns covered both sides, spirals and geometric shapes, lines that curved and intersected in ways that hurt to look at. The craftsmanship was incredible, precise, like it had been done with tools far more advanced than anything I could imagine. And it was warm. Even from a foot away, I could feel heat radiating off it. I reached out slowly, my hand hovering over it. My fingers tingled, like the air around it was charged with static electricity. "What the hell?" I whispered. I picked it up. The moment my skin made contact, I felt it. A pulse. Not a physical vibration. Something deeper, something that resonated in my bones. It was like holding a living thing, something that hummed with its own energy. And the heat, God, the heat was intense. Not burning, but close. Like holding your hand over a candle flame. I turned it over, studying the carvings. The patterns seemed to shift in the light, creating the illusion of depth, of movement. The more I looked, the more I felt like I was staring into something vast and incomprehensible. I set it down on the seat, my heart racing. This wasn't just some trinket. This was something significant. Something old. Something that didn't belong in my truck, or in my world. I should have thrown it out the window right then. I should have left it on the side of the road and driven away as fast as I could. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe, on some level, I already knew that this thing was going to change everything. I wrapped it in a rag from my toolbox and tucked it into the glove compartment. Then I put the truck in gear and got the hell out of there. I made it to Spokane by dawn. The blizzard had passed, leaving the world blanketed in white and eerily silent. I dropped my load, filed my paperwork, and checked into a motel on the edge of town. I was exhausted. I hadn't slept in over 24 hours, and my nerves were shot. All I wanted was a hot shower and 12 hours of sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the hitchhiker, about his size, his silence, his eyes, about the way he'd walked into the forest like he belonged there, like the storm and the cold and the darkness were nothing to him. And I thought about the bone. It was still in the truck, locked in the glove compartment. But even from here, 100 feet away, I could feel it. A faint pull, like a magnet drawing me back. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. That's when the dreams started. I was standing in a forest. Not the Cascades, somewhere older, deeper. The trees were enormous, their trunks wider than my truck, their branches stretching up into a canopy so thick that no sunlight reached the ground. It was dark, but I could see. Not with my eyes, with something else. A different kind of sight that let me perceive shapes and movement in the shadows. I wasn't alone. There were others in the forest. Tall figures moving between the trees, silent and deliberate. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel their presence. They were watching me. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. And then I heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Deep and resonant, like a drumbeat, but alive. It came from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the ground, through the trees, through my bones. The figures moved closer. I could see them now, massive, powerful, covered in dark fur. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. One of them stepped forward. It was the hitchhiker. I recognized him instantly, even though I still couldn't see his face clearly. He raised one hand and pointed at me. And then he spoke. Not with words, with that same resonant sound, that drumbeat language. But somehow I understood. You carry the gift. You carry the burden. You carry the warning. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The motel room was bright with morning light. My heart was hammering in my chest. I sat up, trying to shake off the dream. But it clung to me like a fog, heavy and oppressive. I knew, right then, that this was just the beginning. I tried to go back to my normal routine. I took another load, then another, driving the familiar routes, stopping at the familiar truck stops. But the dreams kept coming. Every night, the same forest, the same figures, the same message. You carry the gift. You carry the burden. You carry the warning. I started losing sleep. My hands shook on the wheel. I couldn't concentrate. After 2 weeks, I knew I couldn't keep this up. I had to know what the bone was. I drove back to Seattle and started asking questions. I went to the University of Washington, to the anthropology department. I told them I'd found an unusual artifact and wanted it identified. The professor I spoke to, Dr. Ellen Garrison, was skeptical at first. But when I showed her the bone, her expression changed. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice tight. "Found it," I said. "Side of the road." "What is it?" She didn't answer. She just stared at it, turning it over in her gloved hands. She took measurements, photographs. She ran her fingers over the carvings, tracing the patterns with a kind of reverence. "This is extraordinary," she said finally. "The craftsmanship is unlike anything I've seen. Pre-Columbian, maybe? But the style doesn't match any known culture." "What about the material?" I asked. "What kind of bone is it?" She hesitated. I'd need to run tests. But based on the size and density, I'd say it's from a large mammal. Possibly elk or bear. And the carvings? I don't know. They're complex. Almost mathematical. Like they're encoding information. Information about what? She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes. Fear? Excitement? I couldn't tell. I don't know, she said. But I'd like to keep this for further study. With your permission. I should have said yes. I should have handed it over and walked away. But I didn't. No, I said. I need it back. She frowned. Mr. Weatherly, this could be an important archaeological find. If you let me study it. I said no. I took the bone from her hands, wrapped it back up, and left. I couldn't explain why I didn't leave it with her. Maybe it was the dreams. Maybe it was the feeling that this thing was mine, that I was meant to carry it. Or maybe I was just scared of what she might find. A week later, I was at a truck stop in Idaho when I met Carl. Carl was a retired engineer, a guy I'd known for years from the road. We'd had coffee together a dozen times, swapping stories about bad weather and worse dispatchers. But this time, when I sat down across from him, he looked at me funny. "Jack, you okay?" he asked. "You look like hell." "Haven't been sleeping," I said. "Yeah, I can see that. But that's not what I'm talking about." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You carrying something radioactive?" I stared at him. "What?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, a Geiger counter. He'd been a nuclear engineer before he retired, and he always carried it with him. "A quirk. I keep this thing clipped to my belt," he said. "And when you walked in, it started clicking. Not a lot, but enough to notice." My blood ran cold. "You're kidding." "I'm not." He held up the Geiger counter. "You mind if I check you?" I nodded, too stunned to speak. He waved the device over me. When it got close to my jacket pocket, where I'd been keeping the bone, the clicking intensified. Not dangerously high, but definitely above background radiation. "What the hell is that?" Carl asked. I pulled out the bone, still wrapped in the rag, and set it on the table. Carl's eyes went wide. "Where did you get that?" "It's a long story." He stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked up at me, and his expression was deadly serious. "Jack, I don't know what that thing is, but you need to get rid of it. If it's radioactive." "It's not dangerous," I said quickly. "The levels are low, right?" "Now, yeah. But you don't know what it's doing to you over time. You've been carrying this thing around for how long?" "A month. 3 weeks, actually." But I didn't correct him. "I can't get rid of it," I said. "Why the hell not?" I didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. Carl shook his head. "You're making a mistake, Jack. Whatever that thing is, it's not worth your health. Or your life." He was right. I knew he was right. But I couldn't let it go. 2 months after I picked up the hitchhiker, I went back to Snoqualmie Pass. I didn't plan it. I was hauling a load west, and my route took me through the Cascades. As I drove through the pass, the memories came flooding back. The blizzard, the hitchhiker, the bone. It was late afternoon, the sky clear and bright. Snow still covered the mountains, but the roads were dry. I pulled over at the spot where I'd dropped him off. Or at least, where I thought I'd dropped him off. It was hard to tell. The forest all looked the same. I sat there for a while, staring at the tree line. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe I thought he'd walk out of the woods. Maybe I thought I'd see something that would explain everything. But there was nothing. Just trees and snow and silence. I was about to leave when I saw it. A figure, standing just inside the tree line. Tall. Impossibly tall. It was him. My heart jumped into my throat. I got out of the truck, slowly, my breath misting in the cold air. "Hey!" I called out. "Hey, I need to talk to you. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer. I still have it. The thing you left. I need to know what it is. I need to know why you gave it to me. Still nothing. I started walking toward the trees. My boots crunched in the snow. My pulse pounded in my ears. Please, I said. I need answers. The figure turned and walked deeper into the forest. I followed. I don't know how long I walked. 10 minutes? An hour? Time seemed to stretch and compress in strange ways. The forest was dense, the trees pressing in on all sides, blocking out the sky. I should have been terrified. I should have turned back. But I didn't. The figure stayed ahead of me, just barely visible through the trees. He moved silently, effortlessly, like the forest was part of him. And then, suddenly, he stopped. We were in a small clearing, maybe 30 feet across. The snow here was untouched, pristine. The air was still and cold. The figure turned to face me. Up close, in the fading daylight, I could finally see him clearly. He was everything I remembered. 7 feet tall, powerfully built, covered in dark fur. But his face. God, his face. It was almost human, but not quite. Broader, more angular, with a pronounced brow and a flat nose. His eyes were large and dark, filled with an intelligence that was unmistakable. He looked at me for a long moment. And then he reached into the folds of his cloak and pulled out another object. Another piece of bone. He held it out to me. I took it, my hands trembling. It was similar to the first one, smooth, carved with intricate patterns, but smaller, shaped like a disc. And it was cold. Not warm, like the first one. Cold. I looked up at him, my mind racing with questions. He raised one hand and placed it over his chest. Then he pointed at me. Then at the bones. I didn't understand. He did it again. Slower this time. Hand over chest. Point at me. Point at the bones. And then I got it. Heart. Me. The bones. He was trying to tell me something. Something important. I opened my mouth to ask, but before I could speak, he turned and walked away. Within seconds, he was gone, swallowed by the forest. I stood there, holding the two bones, feeling the weight of something I couldn't begin to comprehend. I went back to Dr. Garrison. This time, I told her everything. The hitchhiker, the dreams, the radiation, the second encounter. I laid both bones on her desk and waited. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat back in her chair, staring at the bones with an expression I couldn't read. I believe you, she said finally. I blinked. You do. I've been studying the first artifact you brought me, she said. Or trying to. The patterns. They're not random. They're a form of language. Mathematical, symbolic, but definitely communicative. What do they say? I don't know yet. But I have colleagues, linguists, cryptographers, who might be able to help. With your permission, I'd like to bring them in. I hesitated. This doesn't leave this room. Whatever this is, it's private. Between me and him. She nodded. I understand. But Jack, if these artifacts are what I think they are, if they're messages from an unknown species, this could change everything. Our understanding of anthropology, of evolution, of humanity. I don't care about that, I said. I just need to know what he wants from me. She studied me for a moment. Why do you think he gave them to you? I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Maybe, she said slowly, he chose you because he knew you'd ask questions. Because he knew you wouldn't just dismiss it. I hadn't thought of it that way. Over the next 6 months, Dr. Garrison and her team worked on the bones. They ran every test imaginable, radiocarbon dating, spectroscopy, DNA analysis. They mapped the carvings, photographed them from every angle, created 3D models. The results were staggering. The bones were old, at least 300 years, possibly older. But the carvings were recent, made within the last few decades using tools that left microscopic marks consistent with modern precision instruments. How was that possible? The radiation was low-level, but persistent. Not enough to be dangerous, but enough to be measurable. The source was unclear, possibly environmental, possibly biological. And the carvings were extraordinary. Dr. Garrison's team identified patterns that matched mathematical constants. Pi, the golden ratio, Fibonacci sequences. But there were also patterns they couldn't identify, sequences that didn't correspond to any known system. It's like they're encoding multiple layers of information, Dr. Garrison explained. Surface-level patterns that we can recognize, and deeper patterns that we can't. It's sophisticated beyond anything I've ever seen. But what does it mean? I asked. She shook her head. I don't know. But I think it's a map. A map to what? To them. To where they are. To who they are. She showed me a diagram, an overlay of the patterns from both bones, combined and rotated. When aligned correctly, they formed a shape that looked eerily like the Cascade Mountain Range. There's a location encoded here, she said, pointing to a spot on the map. Deep in the national forest, miles from any road or trail. If my calculations are correct, it's right here. She tapped a spot on the map, a remote area northwest of Snoqualmie Pass. What's there? I asked. I don't know. But I think he wants you to find out. It took me 3 months to prepare. I bought hiking gear, studied maps, learned basic survival skills. I told my dispatcher I was taking a leave of absence. I didn't tell him why. Dr. Garrison wanted to come with me, but I refused. This was something I had to do alone. In late August, I drove to the trailhead and started walking. The terrain was brutal. Steep slopes, dense underbrush, rivers swollen with snowmelt. I hiked for 2 days, following the coordinates Dr. Garrison had calculated. On the 3rd day, I found it. A valley, hidden between 2 ridges, invisible from above. The trees here were ancient, their trunks massive, their branches forming a canopy so thick that the forest floor was cast in perpetual twilight. And in the center of the valley, there was a structure. Not a building, exactly. More like a formation. Stones stacked in precise patterns, covered in moss and lichen. At first, I thought it was natural. But as I got closer, I realized it was deliberate. Intentional. The stones were carved. The same patterns as the bones. Spirals and geometric shapes, lines that curved and intersected. But here, they were enormous, covering entire surfaces. I stood there, my breath catching in my throat. This was a place of significance. A sacred site, maybe. Or a meeting place. I set down my pack and pulled out the bones. They felt warm in my hands, pulsing faintly. And then I heard it. That sound. The drumbeat sound from my dreams. Deep and resonant, vibrating through the ground. I turned. They were there. All around me, standing at the edges of the clearing. Dozens of them. Tall, powerful, silent. Watching. My heart was hammering, but I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. One of them stepped forward. The hitchhiker. I recognized him instantly. He approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. He looked down at me, those large dark eyes filled with something I can only describe as sadness. He raised one hand and pointed at the stones. Then at the bones in my hands. Then at me. And I understood. This place was dying. His people were dying. The bones weren't just artifacts. They were a plea. A warning. You carry the gift. You carry the burden. You carry the warning. He wanted me to tell the world. To bear witness. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I will, I said. I'll tell them. I promise. He held my gaze for a long moment. And then, slowly, he placed one massive hand on my shoulder. The weight of it was immense, but gentle. And then he stepped back, turned, and walked into the forest. The others followed. Within moments, they were gone. I stood there, alone in the valley, holding the bones. It's 2024 now. I'm 68 years old, and I don't drive trucks anymore. I kept my promise. I told the world, or at least I tried. I published my story, shared the photographs, contacted researchers. Some people believed me. Most didn't. The bones are in a secure facility now, still being studied. Dr. Garrison passed away 3 years ago, but her work continues. The valley is still there, hidden in the Cascades. I've been back a few times over the years. The stones are still standing, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. But I've never seen them again. The Sask, as Dr. Garrison came to call them. They're still out there, I think. Watching. Waiting. The dreams have faded, but they never fully left. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I still hear that drumbeat sound, echoing through the darkness. I think about the hitchhiker often. About the choice he made to trust me, to give me those bones, to show me that sacred place. I think about the burden he placed on my shoulders. The responsibility to tell the truth, even when no one wants to hear it. And I think about what it means to witness something extraordinary. Something that defies explanation, something that challenges everything you thought you knew about the world. Because that's what he gave me. Not just a mystery, but a gift. A glimpse of something ancient and profound, something that exists just beyond the edges of our understanding. And I carry that with me every day. The gift. The burden. The warning. I carry it still. This script maintains the slow burn, cinematic pacing you requested, with emotional depth, philosophical reflection, and a structure that mirrors the original Bigfoot interrogation story. The first-person memoir style creates intimacy, while the gradual reveal of the bone's significance and the final journey to the sacred valley provides the dramatic arc and meaningful resolution your audience expects.